today's video, we're going to focus on the two brand new weapons that they just added as part of the Season 5 update, the 1.24 update that went through for Modern Warfare, which those weapons obviously carry over to Warzone, and see how good they are and how they stack up and where they're kind of fitting into the overall meta and if they will ever fit into the meta. So we're going to take a look at that, and there's a lot of testing that goes into this one. This is kind of like a breeze through for each of the weapons, kind of give you an idea of where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and give you a better understanding on if you should be using this over the M4, the Grau, the Bruin, and where it overall fits into the overall meta. If you enjoy this video, do me a favor and hitting that like button. Goal on today's video is 3,000 likes. And if you're brand new looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Let's go ahead and get into the breakdown. So first off, I wanted to talk about some of the overall characteristics of the weapon, and then we're going to jump in and compare how those fit in with the other weapons that are already in the game for both multiplayer as well as Warzone. So overall, I've already done the various testing, the simple, straightforward testing. I'm going to do separate videos on each of these weapons with the overall recoil patterns, what the best attachments are, all that type of stuff. I'm going to give you kind of a class setup in this video because most people will look for that. Just look at the timestamp at the bottom if you just want to skip to that part, as many people often do. They don't really care about all the stats and where this fits in. They just want to use the weapon, and they'll just take whatever class setup they can get. So that will be included. So the interesting thing about the AN-94 is it has this weird property where the first couple bullets come out faster and kind of come in a two burst scenario where the RPM of those two shots ends up sitting right around 1400, 1500 RPM, which I was able to measure it at 1446 RPM, which is incredibly fast, but again, it's a burst. Then there's kind of delay between the next shots, and then the rate of fire between the 28th bullet all the way to the rest of the magazine ends up being 589. So it's right in there with the AMAX as far as fire rate. But what you got to do with this, that means when you pull the trigger, the first two bullets come out incredibly fast. Then the bullets come out at kind of a steady pace, and it actually has 4 different damage values and 4 different damage areas where it drops off. So the first damage range is right around 20 meters, then drops off to 32, then 37, and then right above 37 plus to infinity. Pretty much it's going to be able to be a certain value. And then when we look at the time to kill, base shots, all that type of stuff, there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to overwhelm you. I'm going to focus on the other stats, which will be a little bit easier to read. But in general, this is going to be 9 to 14 shots to kill in Warzone. If you're going and shoot them in the base, and the base is pretty much in the legs. Then if you shoot them in the stomach, which they call the lower torso, then you're going to be between 9 to 14 shots to kill. And you can see that it's pretty much right around the same. You get 1 shot faster in that second damage range, which you can see right here. It drops from 11 down to 10. And then as far as same thing with multiplayer, it drops from 5 shots down to 4. And we got that characteristics going on there. Then we have the chest, which they call the upper torso. And then you have a different damage value for that. And then you obviously have headshots. So the fastest this thing can kill in multiplayer is 3 shots if all 3 bullets land in the head. And the slowest will be up to around 14 shots if you're shooting them only in the legs at the furthest distance from 37 above without the max attachment. So that's without the monolithic suppressor and without the barrel that's going to extend the range as much as possible and giving that maximum bullet velocity. So with that, you get the various times to kill based off the shots to kill, based off the rate of fire, all that gets thrown in there, and we get an idea of how good this weapon is. We're going to see how that stacks up versus some of the other weapons that I would compare this weapon to. I think it's more of a hybrid of an M4 and an AMAX kind of coming together, and that's kind of where this weapon sits. Next up, we have the ISO, which is an SMG, and this actually has a pretty good fire rate of around 900 RPM. A good thing with this one, it doesn't have that weird burst mechanic, so it makes it very easy to kind of figure out the time to kill, shots to kill. It only has 3 damage values, so chest and stomach is 1, base is the limbs, and then you have headshots. And then the various damage ranges is actually pretty far for an SMG, up to about 18 meters, and then 22 meters, and then between 22 to 34, and then 34 plus. It has those various drop-offs. Normally, you're not going to take engagements beyond that in Warzone. In multiplayer, you could, because the time to kill isn't like incredibly negatively affected. Even at the further ranges, it's still going to be like 4, 5, 6 shots to kill. But in general, pretty decent. I would label this more as an average weapon. But this extra range you get, it kind of gives you a little bit of versatility on how you want to measure up and stack up your rifle that you're combining this with. And potentially, if you like the recoil pattern, because it has decent ammo, you can actually stack it so that maybe you run it with a sniper, which some people are doing with the MP7. And I think this one ends up being a hybrid between the Fennec and the MP5, which we'll go ahead and take a look at the recoil, the general basic recoil pattern, and that'll give you kind of an idea of what's happening here. Overall, both of these weapons, very easy and manageable recoil, not a ton of side to side, very predictable, kind of up and a little bit to the right, which we're going to go ahead and take a look at. So now we have that in order. What I'm going to use this as kind of the basis on the side, and we're going to go ahead and look at how its contemporaries work and where it actually fits into the meta. And this is a website I've referenced before. It's called truegamedata.com. You can go to check it out. Link will be down in the description. And this gives us base information for the AMAX as well as the M4. When we do a comparison chart, we can see how it looks in regular multiplayer. If we're just looking for standard TTK, this one ends up being 190 millisecond TTK for the chest. When we compare this with the AN-94, it came in right around 144 milliseconds. So right here, it ends up even being faster than the AMAX in multiplayer. So this is a beast in multiplayer. I would definitely recommend using it because even though this has that damage drop off, the second damage drop offs when you get into using the AN-94 is 276. So if we look at this difference right here, 286. So the TTK all the way up until about 40 meters without any attachments is actually faster on the AN-94, which is going to make it a beast within multiplayer. And you can kind of see how it stacks up. Definitely the TTK, the lower the number, the better it gets. Now let's go ahead and look at 250 health, which is how it looks with the 3 plates if you're counting in Warzone. So now we get this first TTK. If you landed only chest shots, this ends up being a 476 millisecond TTK. When we look at how it is for the chest shots, it ends up being 654. So it's not quite as good in Warzone because it ends up being that 8 shot to kill. So the AMAX, just because of how the math works with the number of shots to kill, it doesn't kill quite as fast as the AMAX. But personally, I think more people are going to lean towards the AN just because it has a very manageable recoil. It's almost identical to the M4, which we're going to see in a second. And then on top of that, it has a little bit larger extended mag, which will bump it up to the full amount, which you're normally looking for, instead of the 45 that the AMAX provides. So maybe that'll receive a buff in the future to kind of make that a little bit more viable. If we're looking at even the furthest ranges, we can see that the AMAX drops off to 762, so it has a lot of damage. Whereas if we do the chest shots with the AN, it drops off to 854, and that ends up being in between the two numbers that we're seeing here. So like I said, it's kind of one of those hybrids. As far as ADS speed, it's 300 milliseconds base ADS speed, which is pretty much in line with most of the rifles. So it is a rifle through and through. So overall, I think it'll fit kind of in the meta. It's nothing crazy or spectacular. It's not going to be overpowered, and multiplayer is probably going to be really good. But in general, as far as Warzone goes, I think it's going to be fairly balanced out the gate. So we'll kind of see how the meta settles out and if people are liking this gun, or if it's just one of those honeymoon phases where it's like, oh, it's overpowered because it's brand new. Definitely don't feel like it's overpowered based off all the testing. It just doesn't line it up with it being overpowered. But again, we'll wait and see. Now, let's go ahead and look at how that compares with the SMG. So with the SMG, it had an ADS speed of 234, which is a little bit slower end of SMGs. It could have been 217. Sometimes there's a little bit of frame rounding going on. So that's kind of in line with the SMGs, maybe on the little bit slower end still, because some SMGs have like a 200 millisecond or even 100 and like 180-ish. If you're talking about like the Uzi, you get like on the lowest end of ADS speed, especially if you stack in the attachments the right way. So when it comes to 100 health, no plates, standard multiplayer, we get a TTK of the MP5 right at 150 milliseconds. When it comes to the ISO, you end up with a TTK of 134, which means this imaginary line would actually be a little bit lower, all the way up to about 15 meters, and that's without any attachments. And you'll kind of see why I'm saying this is one of those hybrids between these weapons, because you're getting the fast fire rate of the Fennec, shooting those chest shots, but this one you could shoot the stomach or the chest, so it's very forgiving. You don't have to quite hit that top area to get that extra damage. So for Warzone, we got the Fennec actually has a faster TTK just because of the way the damage profile works. It ends up killing in one less shot, or however the math works out, but at the end of the day, it ends up killing faster, the Fennec. It's right around 500 milliseconds, 498, as you can see on the screen. I know it's a little bit small, but we're talking about chest shots for the Fennec. It ends up being, for the ISO, it ends up being right around 601. So it is a little bit slower. You can see it's going to go all the way up to about 15 meters. It's kind of like on this white line that's right here. So it's going to have a little bit slower TTK up close. But then all the way up to about 18 meters, it's going to have a TTK of right around 600 milliseconds, which is pretty reasonable. It's not going to be overpowered. It's going to fit more like in the P90, but as it gets a little bit further out, it's going to manage to hold its own a little bit. So we'll go ahead and check out now the class setups that I recommend based off all the testing I've done, and give you kind of an idea of how these recoil patterns work. So if we're looking at the AN-94, we're going to get a recoil pattern that goes up and then to the right. I'm not really a fan of these iron sights. I think they're kind of ugly. But if I just shoot the weapon, you'll see it goes up and then diagonally to the right. It has a lot of view kicks, so it's kind of hard to see, but this is almost identical to the M4. And then once you start stacking some attachments together, it does tighten up the same way the M4 does. So I think a lot of people that like the M4 are going to really vibe with this particular gun. Next one up is we have the ISO, and this one's going to go up and kind of bounce a little bit side to side, very similar to the MP5. So if you're a fan of the MP5 recoil, this will be very similar. Obviously, that's only 25 bullets. But when you put the extended mags, again, that almost looks identical to the MP5. I would have almost said, hey, what are these recoil patterns? I would have said that that's the M4 and then that's the MP5. So they've kind of done something with that to make it a little bit easier to see that way. Now let's go ahead and look at what the loadouts are going to be for multiplayer, Warzone, and kind of mix it up. There you go. I think no matter what, this AN-94 needs an optic. Personally, this is the class setup I think I would run for multiplayer and Warzone. I would swap out the VOK for maybe like a reflex sight, something along those lines. So what we have here is that I can actually fire this weapon, and it's 60 round mag, so that's going to be very similar. And you're going to see it goes up, and it's kind of tighter. But overall, this is a very easy recoil pattern to manage. If I just wanted to shoot straight, I just pull down. I've done this pattern a million times with the M4. It's very easy to control that recoil pattern. They all kind of stay in the same spot. This one is pretty cool because it has an integrated suppressor. Very similar to the Fennec, that has that kind of like hybrid suppressor thing. And then the MP5, which has that integrated suppressor. Same thing, it's going to go up and bounce to the right. But this kind of straightens it out quite a bit. And you can see it gets very manageable, very easy to control. If I want to just shoot people at range, I could definitely do that. Hold my recoil down. Very manageable weapon. So I think overall these would be fun classes to run together. So for the AN-94, again, I think you're going to go with the monolithic suppressor. You're going to go with the Sela. If you want a little bit better bullet velocity, recoil control, you can go with the factory. When I changed the sight, I didn't really notice any difference the same way you get with the Grau, where the barrel changes, or the AMAX, the barrel changes and it changes your iron sights. So I think the optic is almost 100% the way to go. It just doesn't have that clean feel that we've seen on other AN-94s in the past. Commando foregrip, as typical standard, kind of eases out that recoil pattern, kind of tightens it up so it's not near as much side-to-side bounce, and it kind of just straightens it up so we get that up and then diagonal to the right. Very manageable. Get the 60 round mag. You could go with the 45 round mag at multiplayer, just because maybe you're not going to have as many engagements, especially if you're playing like 6v6 or the CDL playlist or whatever, if you're going to be playing with those types of weapons. And then the final attachment, you're probably going to either use the VLK or one other mini reflex or the Corp Combat Hollow, whatever sight you're comfortable with, depending on how the range you're going to be able to use this. But I think this fits more in that M4 category, so you could stack this a little bit more for ADS speed. If you don't have a problem with the iron sights, maybe put on a tack laser, and this will be your close range option. And then you stack this with the sniper rifle of some kind. So you could definitely go that route, and that is the first class setup. The next one we'll go ahead and take a look at is the ISO. And the ISO, I would go with the integrated suppressor the same way we would for the MP5, primarily because you're getting that bullet velocity, which means you're getting the extended range. And the way the games typically work is the attachments kind of do similar things across certain weapons once you kind of line up which weapons are doing what. Even though they got all these names, this one ends up being the monolithic integral suppressor. When you see it on the screen, it shows it right here on the actual thing. It says monolithic integral suppressor, keep weapon silent, increases range for a longer distance, stealth assaults. And then it's all included there. So that's updated. And then obviously you're going to get the mobility penalty, but you're able to make up for that with a little bit of Merc. You get a faster mobility, even though a little bit slower ADS. The FTAC ISO Elite Grip. This one's more like a stippled grip. And then the last thing is the FTAC Vagrant. That's more like a close quarter stock. You could go the collapsible stock, but because of the nerf they had to the collapsible stocks as well as no stocks, you might have a little bit too much recoil. So I would probably avoid that one in general. So that's pretty much how it works. Reload speed feels decent on both the weapons, so I don't really think sleight of hand is necessary. But those would be my 2 starter class setups for this individual weapon. So hopefully you found the video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor, hit that like button. If you're brand new looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.